Is this what freedom looks like to you, Captain Traore? President Macron's voice was razor-sharp, cutting through the tension in the television studio. The cameras captured every micro-expression as he leaned forward, eyes locked on the young military leader across from him. Burkina Faso's economy in shambles, security deteriorating daily, and international isolation growing? This is your vision of independence. The global audience watching the unprecedented debate collectively held their breath. Never before had the leader of a former colonial power and the military leader of a recently liberated African nation faced off on live television like this. Ibrahim Traore's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. At 34 years old, the youngest head of state in the world sat straight-backed in his military fatigues, deliberately contrasting with Macron's tailored suit. The studio lights gleamed off the golden eagle pins on his collar. "No, Mr. President," Traore replied, his voice steady as a drum. "Freedom looks like the ability to make our own mistakes without a foreign power's hand guiding the knife." He leaned forward as the translator relayed his words, eyes never leaving Macron's. "Freedom is messy, but it is ours." Behind the cameras in the control room, network executives watched the ratings surge. What had begun as a diplomatic overture, a debate to ease tensions between France and its former colonies now aligned with Russia, was becoming combustible television. The stakes were astronomical: France's waning influence in West Africa, Russia's growing footprint, and the future of millions hanging in the balance. What the audience couldn't see was the small leather pouch concealed in Traore's pocket, containing something that would shatter the careful diplomatic dance unfolding on stage. And what they didn't know was that Macron had received an encrypted message just before going live, revealing information about Traore that could destroy everything the young captain had built. The moderator, a respected Swiss journalist, turned to the next segment. "Captain Traore, 3 years ago when you took power, you promised prosperity and security for Burkina Faso. Let's examine what has happened since." The screens behind them lit up with devastating images. Markets closed due to security concerns, displaced civilians in camps, shuttered schools, and graphs showing plummeting economic indicators. "The numbers don't lie," Macron interjected smoothly. "Foreign investment down 60%. Tourism non-existent. And most troubling," he paused for effect, "terrorist attacks have increased threefold since you expelled French forces." The camera lingered on Traore's face as the translator whispered in his ear. For a brief moment, something like doubt flickered across his features. Macron continued, his tone shifting to one of practiced compassion. "But what I find most disturbing is this." He gestured to an aide who approached with a tablet. "Intelligence reports we're making public today show that the Wagner Group, whom you've invited to replace our counterterrorism operations, has been systematically looting your gold mines." The screen displayed satellite imagery of mining operations, alongside banking transactions and weapons shipments. "They aren't there to protect your people, Captain. They're there to extract your resources with less oversight than any colonial power ever imposed." Murmurs rippled through the studio audience. Traore's translator hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the revelation. "Your Russian allies," Macron paused, "are taking almost 80% of mining profits, compared to the 30% partnership agreement we had established." Traore's expression darkened as the evidence mounted. The studio felt suffocatingly hot under the lights. This wasn't part of the agreed-upon debate format. He'd been blindsided. The moderator tried to intervene. "Mr. President, these are serious allegations that Captain Traore hasn't had time to—" "They are not allegations," Macron interrupted. "They are verified facts. And I suspect Captain Traore already knows this, which explains why his personal offshore accounts have grown considerably while his people suffer." The studio fell silent. The accusation of personal corruption hung in the air like poison gas. Traore's military aides along the wall visibly stiffened. In that moment, Ibrahim Traore appeared exactly what his critics claimed: a young, inexperienced military officer out of his depth in international politics, manipulated by greater powers, possibly corrupted and failing his people. The narrative that France had carefully constructed was materializing on global television. Traore sat motionless, absorbing the blow. The moderator glanced nervously between the two leaders, uncertain whether to proceed. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then, slowly, deliberately, Traore reached inside his jacket. Security personnel tensed, but he withdrew only a small leather pouch. With methodical movements, he untied its drawstring and emptied the contents onto the table between them. "Soil. A handful of reddish-brown earth. Do you know what this is, Mr. President?" Traore asked quietly. Macron looked puzzled. I assume it's Burkinabe soil. Yes. From my village. Where my grandmother is buried. Traore's voice remained soft, but now carried a resonance that commanded attention. She could not read or write, but she taught me something no French school ever did. He picked up a pinch of the soil, letting it fall between his fingers. She said, a tree without roots cannot stand against the wind. Know your soil. The translator struggled to convey the proverb's nuance, but the visual spoke volumes. The young captain was no longer defensive. Something had shifted. Before I address your accusations, which I will, let me tell you about the soil of Burkina Faso. Traore switched effortlessly to fluent French, surprising Macron and eliminating the need for translation. For 60 years since independence, we have been taught that our soil is poor, that we cannot feed ourselves, that we need external expertise and investment. He looked directly into the camera. Yet this same soil sustained great empires before colonization. This soil contains the third largest gold reserves in Africa. This soil grows cotton that clothes the world. This soil holds manganese, zinc and limestone. And recently, he paused, this soil has revealed something else. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Macron's face. 3 months ago, our geologists confirmed substantial lithium deposits. Critical for batteries. For the green transition Europe so desperately needs. Traore's voice gained strength. We kept this quiet while verifying the findings and considering our options. The revelation rippled through the studio. Lithium, the white gold of the clean energy future, would transform Burkina Faso's geopolitical importance overnight. So when you speak of our economic troubles, Mr. President, understand that we are in a transition. A painful one, yes. But we are establishing the true value of our soil before signing away our future. Traore leaned forward. As for your allegations about Russian exploitation and my personal accounts, he nodded to an aide who stepped forward with a folder. I anticipated this line of attack. The aide distributed documents to the moderator and Macron. These are the full contract terms with all security partners, including Russian ones. Yes, they are expensive. War is expensive. But these are fixed-term contracts with technology transfer clauses, not open-ended agreements like we had with France. Traore's eyes narrowed. And those bank accounts you mentioned? They are military operational funds, transparent to our council and parliament. Every franc is accounted for. The documents being distributed told a different story than Macron had presented, not of a naive young officer, but of a strategic leader playing a complex geopolitical game, balancing powers against each other while building domestic capacity. You see, Mr. President, Traore continued, his voice carrying a new authority, my generation studied not just in your Sorbonne, but also in Beijing, Moscow, and Washington. We speak your languages, understand your systems, and recognize your strategies. He gestured to his military fatigues. You see these and think, uneducated soldier. That perception has been useful. The studio audience murmured as they witnessed the transformation. The young captain wasn't just defending himself, he was revealing layers of complexity and calculation that no one had anticipated. The moderator, recognizing the debate had entered uncharted territory, attempted to regain control. Perhaps we should move to the topic of regional security. No, Macron interrupted, his diplomatic veneer cracking slightly. Let's continue this discussion about resources and partnerships. He scanned the documents before him, clearly recalibrating his approach. These contracts are interesting, Captain, but they don't address the fundamental issue, security. While you focus on mineral rights and sovereignty, villages in northern Burkina Faso are being massacred by jihadist groups. The screens displayed fresh images of violence. Burned-out villages, displaced families, child soldiers. Yesterday, Macron continued, 37 civilians were killed in Djibo. The day before, a school was attacked in Dori. This is happening under your watch with your new security partners. Traore didn't flinch at the images. Every death weighs on me, Mr. President. But let's be clear about what's really at stake here, for both of us. He stood up, breaking protocol, and walked to the large map of West Africa displayed on the video wall. The cameras followed him. This isn't just about Burkina Faso. It's about this entire region. He traced a line across the Sahel. Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, possibly Guinea. One by one we are charting independent paths. Traore turned back to face Macron. And that terrifies you, not because of humanitarian concerns, though I don't doubt you have them, but because France's entire economic model and global relevance depends on its relationship with Africa. The audience stirred uncomfortably at the baldness of the statement. 40% of your uranium comes from Niger, Traore continued. Your military bases across the Sahel secure your geopolitical influence. The CFA franc ties our economies to yours. Your corporations dominate our infrastructure, telecommunications, and banking. Macron maintained his composure, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped his pen. So when I speak of independence, Mr. President, I'm not talking about Burkina Faso alone. I'm talking about a fundamental restructuring of the relationship between Europe and Africa. That's what makes the violence in my country more than a local conflict. It's a battle for the future economic order. As if on cue, the moderator's assistant approached with breaking news. The moderator scanned the paper, then looked up gravely. I've just been informed that the French embassy in Ouagadougou is currently surrounded by protesters. Similar demonstrations are occurring outside French businesses and military installations across the Sahel. Macron's eyes flickered to his aides, who were urgently checking their phones. And, the moderator continued, the finance ministers of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have just released a joint statement announcing their intention to leave the CFA franc zone and establish a new regional currency. The stakes had just escalated beyond a television debate between two leaders. They were witnessing a coordinated regional rebellion against decades of economic structure, happening in real time. Traore returned to his seat, his point made without having to state it explicitly. This confrontation had implications far beyond either man's political future. It would affect millions of lives, billions in capital flows, and the geopolitical map of an entire continent. Macron recovered quickly, a testament to his political agility. Coordination is impressive, Captain, he acknowledged with a thin smile. But economic revolution requires more than gestures and announcements. Your countries lack the reserves to back a new currency. Your infrastructure depends on French companies. And your security situation, he gestured to the images of violence still displayed on screen, hardly inspires confidence in investors. He leaned forward, his tone shifting from adversarial to conciliatory. But it doesn't have to be this way. France recognizes that our relationship with Africa must evolve. That's why I'm here, not to defend the past but to offer a new partnership. Macron signaled to his aide, who distributed new documents. A Marshall Plan for the Sahel. 20 billion euros in development funding. Debt forgiveness. Technology transfer. And a gradual, responsible transition to full monetary sovereignty, not a chaotic rupture that would collapse your economies overnight. The offer hung in the air, seductive in its generosity, threatening in its implicit warning about the consequences of refusal. Traore accepted the document but didn't open it. Instead, he placed it beside the small pile of soil still on the table, the visual juxtaposition clear to everyone watching. A generous offer, Mr. President. But you misunderstand our position if you think it's about extracting better terms from France. Traore's voice remained steady. It's about building something new. He finally opened the document, skimming it. Your offer assumes we need France to solve problems that France helped create. It assumes we lack alternatives. For the first time, Traore smiled, a gesture that transformed his severe military bearing. Let me show you our strategic plan. He nodded to his aide, who distributed thumb drives rather than papers. What you'll find here isn't just Burkina Faso's plan. It's a coordinated regional approach developed over the past 18 months. While you've been watching our public confrontations with your ambassadors, we've been quietly building alternatives. The studio lights dimmed as the screens illuminated with dramatic satellite imagery. The feed zoomed in on a village in northern Burkina Faso that had been razed by terrorist attacks 6 months earlier. This is Taguri village, 3 weeks ago, Traore said quietly. The image shifted to show the same village rebuilt, with armed civilian patrols visible and children in a schoolyard. Not secured by foreign troops but by our own people. Traditional hunters working with military veterans, using knowledge of local terrain that no foreign force could match. The screen split to show similar transformations occurring across dozens of villages, forming a growing network of secure zones. The Western security model failed here because it was designed in Paris or Washington. Ours succeeds because it grows from Burkinabe soil. Macron leaned forward, visibly intrigued despite himself. The screens flashed to an underground banking facility where technicians were testing new currency notes bearing symbols from across the Sahel region. This is what independence looks like, Mr. President, Traore continued, his voice gaining intensity. Our new currency launches in 3 months, backed by gold, lithium, and agricultural futures. Not a single foreign bank controls its value. A gasp rippled through the audience as the screens displayed construction footage of massive infrastructure projects. Railway lines cutting through desert terrain, solar farms stretching to the horizon. These aren't just plans or promises, Traore said, his eyes locked on Macron's. They're already happening. Financed not by crippling IMF loans, but by resource-backed bonds that our people control. The final image showed young Africans in a state-of-the-art technical institute, developing drone technology for agricultural monitoring. This generation won't be sending CVs to Paris hoping for approval, Traore said, his voice resonating with conviction. They're building solutions for African problems with African resources. As the lights came back up, the studio remained in stunned silence. The French delegation exchanged troubled glances. This wasn't the desperate flailing of fragile states, it was a coordinated vision with implementation already in progress, threatening everything they had assumed about the balance of power. You see, Mr. President, Traore concluded, we don't need a Marshall Plan. We need fair partnerships and space to implement our own solutions. Your historical advantages, military presence, currency control, corporate dominance, are precisely what we must transcend to build sustainable societies. He closed the folder containing Macron's offer. But we are not rejecting France. We are inviting you to be part of a new relationship, as equals, not as patrons. The mood in the studio had transformed. What began as a seemingly one-sided confrontation between a global power and a struggling regional leader had become a clash of competing visions for the future. Both sophisticated, both compelling. Macron's expression remained diplomatic, but a new intensity burned in his eyes. The stakes were now clear to everyone watching. This wasn't just about Burkina Faso or even the Sahel. It was about the entire post-colonial relationship between Europe and Africa, with trillions in economic activity hanging in the balance. Your vision is ambitious, Captain, Macron acknowledged, his tone measured. But it relies on partners whose intentions may be no more altruistic than those you accuse France of harboring. Russia seeks resource access and geopolitical leverage. China wants markets and political support. The Gulf states want agricultural land and influence. Macron stood now, commanding the space. You're not achieving independence, you're trading one set of dependencies for another, possibly less transparent ones. He walked toward the map where Traore had stood earlier. And this coordination you speak of, do the people of the Sahel know the terms? Have your parliaments, such as they are under military governments, reviewed these agreements? The implied criticism of the region's democratic deficits hit its mark. Murmurs spread through the audience. The path you propose leads to exactly what we're seeing, violence, instability, and suffering, Macron continued. Not because France wishes it, but because sudden ruptures in complex systems create vacuums that are filled by the most ruthless actors. He turned to face Traore directly. You speak of equality and partnership, but you came to power through a gun, not a ballot. You demand transparency from France while negotiating secretly with our competitors. You invoke the suffering of your people while gambling with their security and economic stability. The accusation hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Then Macron delivered his final thrust. And now the unfortunate truth I must share. He nodded to his aide, who distributed a final document. Intelligence from multiple services confirms that elements within your security forces, Captain, your inner circle, have been collaborating with the very jihadist groups you claim to be fighting. Gasps rippled through the studio. The moderator looked stunned. The evidence suggests a cynical strategy, allowing certain attacks to continue to justify your emergency powers and military rule, while focusing your real security efforts on protecting mining interests and suppressing political opposition. Traore's face remained impassive, but the tension in the studio reached breaking point. His military aides along the wall shifted uncomfortably. So I ask you directly, Captain Traore, Macron pressed, how can you speak of moral leadership when there is blood on your hands? Not from the difficult decisions any leader must make, but from cynical political calculations. The accusation was devastating, and it struck at the core of Traore's moral authority. If true, it would undermine everything he had presented himself to be. The world waited for his response. Traore sat motionless for a long moment, the weight of the accusation settling over the studio like a shroud. Then, with deliberate movements, he reached for his water glass, not to drink but to slide it aside. There it is, he said quietly. The colonial playbook, final chapter. When all else fails, when the economic threats don't work, when the political isolation doesn't bend us, character assassination remains. He looked directly at Macron. These allegations aren't new, Mr. President. They appear whenever an African leader challenges the established order. Sankara faced them before his assassination. Lumumba before him. Traore stood slowly. But let's address them directly. He walked to the evidence Macron had presented, examining it before the cameras. These documents show communications between Colonel Bayala of my security detail and individuals with suspected jihadist connections. Traore nodded. They're real. And there's a reason for them. The admission sent shockwaves through the studio. Colonel Bayala has been leading our most sensitive operation, infiltrating terrorist networks to understand their financing and support structures. Operation Desert Spider, as we call it, has been tracking the money, weapons, and intelligence flowing to these groups. Traore's eyes narrowed as he looked at Macron. And do you know what we discovered, Mr. President? The patterns led us to unexpected places. He signaled to his aide, who activated a secure tablet. Including to certain elements within French intelligence services and private military contractors with ties to your defense ministry. The audience erupted in shocked murmurs. The moderator tried unsuccessfully to restore order. Not official French policy, I believe, Traore continued, his voice cutting through the chaos. Rather, rogue elements with economic interests in regional instability. Individuals who profit from security contracts, weapon sales, and resource concessions that are justified by ongoing conflict. He placed the tablet on the table between them, displaying financial transfers and communication logs. We've been building this case carefully, working with partners including Interpol and even reformist elements within French intelligence who are disturbed by what they've discovered. The first genuine surprise of the confrontation had been delivered. The accusation against the accuser, with supporting evidence, had shifted the dynamic yet again. So yes, Mr. President, there has been contact between my security personnel and terrorist-affiliated individuals. As part of an intelligence operation that has uncovered something deeply troubling, elements within your security apparatus have been playing a double game in the Sahel, officially fighting terrorism while unofficially ensuring the conditions for it persist. The two men stood facing each other, the physical embodiment of two systems in direct confrontation. The colonial power and the former colony. The established order and the emerging challenge. History and future colliding in real time. Around them, aides were frantically communicating on secure channels. The global audience had swelled to unprecedented numbers. Financial markets were already reacting to the implications of what was unfolding. The confrontation had moved beyond political theater into something more consequential. A moment of truth that would reshape relationships, economies, and lives across multiple continents. The moderator, recognizing the explosive nature of the mutual accusations, tried to impose structure on the unraveling debate. These are serious allegations from both sides that will require thorough investigation. Perhaps we should. No, Macron interrupted, his composure showing cracks for the first time. We need to address this directly. He turned to his aides, conferring urgently in whispers. The studio waited in tense silence. Whatever came next would be unscripted, beyond the careful diplomatic preparations that had preceded this encounter. Macron finally straightened and faced the cameras directly. The French Republic categorically denies any official involvement in supporting terrorist activities in the Sahel or anywhere else. Such actions would be contrary to our fundamental values and interests. The careful wording, official involvement, wasn't lost on anyone. However, Macron continued, his tone shifting subtly, I am deeply disturbed by the evidence Captain Traore has presented. If any French citizens, whether in government service or private enterprise, have acted to perpetuate conflict for personal gain, they will face the full force of French law. He turned to Traore. I propose we establish an independent international commission to investigate all allegations, those against your government and those against French interests, with full transparency and cooperation from both sides. Before Traore could respond, a commotion erupted off camera. A production assistant rushed to the moderator, whispering urgently in her ear. The moderator's face paled. I'm being told we have to interrupt, she announced. There's been an incident at the French embassy in Ouagadougou. The screen switched to live footage, the French embassy surrounded by thousands of protesters, smoke rising from the compound. A breathless reporter explained that classified documents had been seized by demonstrators who were now broadcasting their contents live across social media. Files confirming everything Captain Traore alleged, the reporter stated. Communications between French operatives and terror cells. Financial transfers. Target lists. Macron's aides surrounded him in panic, showing urgent messages on their phones. The French president's composure cracked completely, his face ashen. "Is this your doing?" he demanded, turning to Traore. The young captain looked as surprised as everyone else. "The people have found their own evidence, it seems," he replied quietly. "I didn't plan this, but I won't condemn those seeking truth." The studio erupted in chaos. Security personnel moved to protect both leaders. The moderator desperately tried to maintain order. Through the commotion, Traore stood calmly and approached Macron. The cameras followed, capturing this unscripted moment as millions watched worldwide. "Your commission is irrelevant now," Traore said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The evidence is already public. But I still extend my hand, not for investigation but for reconstruction." Macron stared at the outstretched hand, awareness dawning that the old diplomatic playbook had just been rendered obsolete. After a long moment he grasped Traore's hand. "The old way ends today," he said hoarsely. The handshake that followed was not just between two leaders, but between two eras, the dying gasp of neocolonialism and the first breath of something new. As they retook their seats, Traore placed his hand once more on the small pile of soil he had brought. "There is something else I must share. A truth larger than either of us." He looked not at Macron but at the cameras, at the millions watching worldwide. "This conflict isn't really about France and Burkina Faso. It's about a global system that has remained fundamentally unchanged despite the formal end of colonialism. The currencies, the trade structures, the military arrangements, the corporate ownership, they all preserve colonial economic relationships while maintaining the fiction of independence." Traore's voice gained strength. "And now, that system is crumbling, not because of ideological rebellion but because of its own contradictions. It cannot deliver prosperity to either side. It keeps the global South dependent while making the global North fragile." He gestured between himself and Macron. "So what you're witnessing isn't just a confrontation between two leaders. It's the birth pangs of a new global arrangement, one that must emerge if we are to collectively face the challenges of climate change, resource scarcity, and technological disruption." Traore leaned forward, his eyes reflecting the studio lights. "This is why the stakes are so high. This is why there has been blood. The old system is fighting to preserve itself, while a new one struggles to be born." Then came the moment that would be replayed in history classes for generations. "So I extend an invitation to France, not just to investigate past wrongs, but to join us in building something unprecedented, a truly post-colonial relationship. Not based on charity or historical guilt, but on the recognition that our futures are bound together in ways that transcend the old hierarchies." He turned to address Macron directly. "Your nation helped create the current global system, Mr. President. It can help create what comes next. But only as partners, not as patrons." The second surprise of the confrontation landed with seismic force. Not a rejection of the former colonial power, but an invitation to genuine transformation. Macron, ever the strategic thinker, recognized the historic opportunity being presented. "France is ready for a new chapter," he responded, measuring each word carefully. "Not erasing our history but not being confined by it either." He stood again, this time not to dominate but to signal respect. "The commission we've agreed to will address the past. But I accept your invitation to simultaneously work toward a new model for the future." What had begun as a diplomatic confrontation was concluding as something else entirely, the public commitment by leaders from both sides of the colonial divide to forge a genuinely new relationship. As the debate drew to a close, Ibrahim Traore reached once more for his pouch of soil, returning the earth to its container with ceremonial care. "My grandmother was right," he said quietly. "Know your soil. But she taught me something else too. When you plant new seeds, you must tend them with patience and vigilance." He secured the pouch and looked up. "The seeds of a new relationship have been planted today. Let us tend them with care." 3 months later, Ibrahim Traore stood alone at dusk on the construction site of the new regional currency mint in Ouagadougou. The last workers had departed, leaving him with his thoughts and the skeleton of what would become the financial heart of a new Sahel. His phone vibrated, a secure message from Paris. "It's done," Macron's text read simply. "The parliament voted. All military bases to be transferred to Sahelian control within 6 months. The corrupt network in our intelligence services has been dismantled. 23 arrests so far." Traore pocketed the phone without replying. The personal cost had been enormous. 3 assassination attempts since the debate. His family relocated to secure locations. Former allies turned enemies overnight. The struggle to maintain unity among the Sahelian nations as outside powers sought to divide them. But tonight brought confirmation that the gamble had paid off. His aide approached, carrying a small wooden box. "From President Macron," the aide explained. "Delivered by diplomatic courier an hour ago." Traore opened it carefully. Inside lay a small glass vial containing soil, dark, rich French soil, with a handwritten note. "A seed cannot grow in clenched fists. Let us both open our hands." Traore smiled for the first time in weeks. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the leather pouch containing his grandmother's soil. In a gesture both deliberate and spontaneous, he mixed the two soils together in his palm, then scattered the combined earth across the foundation of the new building. "A new soil for new seeds," he whispered. As night fell over the Sahel, satellites passing overhead captured an extraordinary image. Lights spreading across the region, village by village, city by city, a network of illumination where darkness had dominated for so long. Not the imposed brightness of colonial outposts, but the self-generated light of communities reclaiming their future. The world was watching a transformation that many had claimed impossible. Not just the end of an old order, but the painful, promising birth of something truly new. And it had begun with two men facing each other across a table, finding the courage to speak unspoken truths and imagine an unwritten future.